Welcome to this episode of the Phoenix Conversations. Second chances, fresh starts, and powerful new chapters. Today I'm talking to Paul Avins, one of the UK's most sought after scale up strategists and business coach to CEOs and founders. He's an author, speaker, investor, and host of the Grown Up Business podcast. Over the past 20 plus years, Paul has coached over 1,000 clients to surpass the 1 million mark in revenue, with many scaling to 5 million and 10 million heights. Paul doesn't just teach business growth, he lives it. He's built, scaled, and sold multiple companies himself, including a digital marketing agency and video production company, giving him real-world battle scars and breakthroughs that inform everything he teaches. And those battle scars include reinventions, which, it turns out, started when Paul was aged only 3 months and went on to include a near-death experience that changed everything. Welcome, Paul Avins, to the Phoenix Conversations podcast. It is lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for coming and agreeing to talk about your reinventions, of which there's one very key one in the middle. But let's start at the beginning. So what was your childhood like, Paul? Where did you grow up? What were your views of life when you were young?
My childhood is quite an interesting story. So I was adopted, but that didn't happen for about 3 months. So I had a period in my life where for 3 months I was sort of on my own, waiting for the services to find an adoption parents for me. So that was a kind of interesting sort of start to just the whole kind of journey in terms of like, who are you? What are you about? And all of those kind of things. And then amazing parents that brought me up. I was very lucky in terms of that side of things. I wasn't diagnosed until dyslexic till I was, I'm a big fan about trying to spread the word about dyslexia as a superpower, but I wasn't diagnosed until I was probably 15 with dyslexia. So I had a very challenging childhood from the perspective of schools didn't diagnose it back then. My father used to say I was just lazy, and he did that because he didn't understand the way my brain worked and how it was different. But for me, school academically was always a challenge because I was A, bored out of my brains by the pace of it, but B, where I did excel and where I did do really well was anything to do with team sports and that kind of creative problem solving stuff. So that was the areas that I would always kind of gravitate towards because, ultimately I could create value there. I could feel like I was somebody in that situation. I was able to have some impact, whereas academically, I just used to sit at the back of the class and dread being asked to speak out loud or dread when they would give out the test scores because I pretty much knew I was always going to be in the bottom 3. In fact, I remember one year where I managed to get out of the bottom 3 and got into the bottom 5, and that was me having a massive win. And I was like, that's progress, right? We've got into the top 15 of a class of 20. And the way my brain's wired as somebody with dyslexia, the learning methodology at school at that time was very much one-way traffic, right? It wasn't taught in a way that was designed to help people's brains work. And, it's funny how life works, right? So subsequently, now that I spend a lot of my time training entrepreneurs, most of whom have some form of ADHD, I've had to learn how to teach and train and keep that kind of brain engaged. And because I've got that kind of brain, it's kind of been quite a useful skill later in life. However, when you're sort of 12 or 9 and 10, you don't understand at that point that it's going to prove to be useful later in your life.
No, I mean, I think that's almost a kind of reinvention in itself. I'm really interested because I did not know when we started this conversation that you were adopted. And I find that fascinating because my husband and I've got 2 adopted daughters, are all adopted, and they're all neurodivergent as well. So I completely, I mean, I'm not, so I can't say I completely understand, but I understand the experience, which is, and I think adoption is kind of a reinvention, isn't it? Because you don't know it, you're not there at the time. I mean, you're not able to process it, but it's kind of become you're in a different family, which is.
Yeah, well, to be fair, it's probably the biggest reinvention you'll ever have, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so you are aware of the unconscious you is aware of something, okay? And but you don't figure that out till a lot later, right? And if we fast forward a bit for a minute and come back, I'll explain something. So one of the reasons I got into the world of personal development and coaching and all of that, gosh, now what? Probably introduced to personal development well over 35 years ago. And the whole reason I got introduced to that world was because I was trying to figure out what was wrong with me. The question that was driving my life at that particular point was, what is wrong with me? Right. And the kind of hypothesis that I was running at the time was that there must be something wrong with me for my family to give me up for adoption. Therefore, there must be something wrong with me. Right. That was the whole thing. So I had 3 months where I was on my own. That's a really interesting thing. And it's still catches up with me even now today. There'll be patterns and stuff that still trigger me. I was afraid of the cold for large parts of my life purely because I was on my own for the first 3 months of my life, right? So, um, it's kind of like,
Literally
it's
on your
interesting.
own. I mean, obviously
Yeah.
not, but wow, that's
Yeah. So the
extraordinary.
cold used to terrify me because I wasn't, normally the first 3 months of your life, you're held a lot, you're very warm, and I didn't have any of that. So the first 3 months of my life, I was cold, I was afraid, I was alone a lot. And therefore, cold used to trigger fear in me. Used to be something that used to scare me a lot. And yeah, it's the ultimate reinvention really, because suddenly you go, right, okay, I'm not, whatever that was, I'm not that anymore. And I got to figure out how to be a part of this new family, and I got to figure out how to work that out. And then my sister, who's adopted as well, arrived a few years later. Funny enough, weirdly, I only found this out recently when my dad sort of mentioned it in conversation, that my sister arrived on the very same day that I did, but 3 years later. Like
Wow,
the exact same day, which
extraordinary.
is just weird, right? And it was my mum's birthday too. That's the weird thing. So it was my mum's birthday, and my mum's birthday has always been a very emotional kind of thing for me anyway. And I never really understood why. But obviously, when my dad sort of like casually just went, "Oh yeah, that was your mum's birthday. That was when you arrived, and then when your sister arrived." And I was like, "Wait, what?
Wow.
How did I get to be 54 years old and you've never mentioned that before?" And he sort of looked at me and went, I don't know. I was like, yeah, that's kind of a really interesting part. That explains a lot why I find my mum's birthday quite a troubling time of the year, because it churns up an awful lot of emotions for an awful lot of reasons, right? But yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's like I've always felt that I've had to reinvent myself if I didn't fit in wherever I was. So I went to public school on a scholarship for sport, but I did not fit in. I didn't come from money. My family wasn't rich. So again, it's a question of how do you fit into that, and how do you reinvent yourself to kind of fit into that world? Because, you could easily feel on the outside. I think I did for a large part, but then you start reinventing yourself, go, okay, I'm a really good sports person. I can do that really, really well. I'm a great team player. And then I got into the combined cadet corps, and that became something I was really, really just connected with me. I could do that. Loved it. Loved the whole outdoors side. Loved the leadership stuff. Was planning on a career in the military before I got injured at 18. But that was a reinvention for me, because it was like, right, okay, I've got to figure out how I can fit into this world that I am absolutely not from, and then try and reinvent who's Paul in this version of that world, right? So yeah, my childhood was probably one of those things where I'd probably done 3 reinventions by the time I was about 18, to be fair.
Yes, that's a lot already.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Quite tiring.
yes, it's literally tiring. Yes, hard work. So when you were 18, what happened then? Where did you go
Well, I was
to?
supposed to go to Sandhurst on a military scholarship, and I got really badly injured and dislocated my shoulder and tore up my shoulder, and then basically had a year out and went to university for a year. Well, went to study business studies, and that didn't work out because, again, back in a classroom and just sat there going, I don't really get this. I kind of want to get in the real world and just, I want to play the game. I want to be out doing stuff, and sitting in a classroom talking about theory just never really did it for me. I like to go out and test stuff, get feedback, figure out what works. So I spent about a year there. Had a very pivotal moment where one of the lecturers went through this. It was an assignment. I can't even remember what it was about, but anyway, gave everyone else out there their feedback and their scores and all that stuff. And then mine was kept back till the very end. And I remember sitting there thinking, and he asked me to come up to the front of the room, and proceeded to basically explain to me how I had no right being on the course, and that I really shouldn't have a career in business because I hadn't spelled business correctly, or entrepreneurship, which I always think is a very hard word for a dyslexic person to spell anyway, right? Entrepreneurship is a really hard word. Like that, as a dyslexic person, let me tell you, it's a hard word to spell. And he basically said, look, you should fail out of this course because you're not going to make it in business. And I remember sort of being stood there and thinking to myself, I have there's two decisions here I need to make. Number one, if I listen to him, then my life is going in a certain direction and it's predetermined by him. Or I choose to walk out of the room and go, I don't buy that version of me that you're trying to sell me, and I'm going to go in a different direction. I'm going to figure out a different path. And that's what I did. So I literally kind of walked off the campus that day, never went back, never just, basically said, that's it, I'm done, I'm not coming back. And went off to reinvent myself again, if you like, and try and figure out what the next thing would be, because clearly that wasn't working. So, that was one of those moments of, right, I got to go and decide what I'm going to be next now, because it's not this. And I think sometimes the best reinventions come from the moments when other people challenge you to be somebody you want to be or be somebody you don't want to be. And you've got to make a decision about whether you're going to buy their narrative about you or their story about you. And that, for me, that's always been the case. And my reinventions have usually come when people have told me I can't do something, or I don't qualify for that, or they're usually the moments that kind of stuff it. Then we'll reinvent what we're doing. And I think we're all doing it all the time, right? I mean, some are forced, some of the decisions that you choose, and some are ones that you don't have a choice, that the market decides you've got to reinvent your business model because of technology, or, your relationship breaks down and now you got to reinvent who you are because that doesn't work out. I kind of feel like sometimes there are the ones. That's why I'm a really big fan of the Phoenix. I'm a fan of that just because it is all about kind of, you got to be able to come back from the ashes. And I always say a setback is quite often a setup. I teach this thing called the catapult principle, right? Which is 9 times out of 10, we misunderstand that when we're being pulled back under pressure, it's actually to jump forward in a massive way. But most people interpret it as though we're going backwards and it's all going horribly wrong. And actually 9 times out of 10, you're just being pulled backwards, so that when you finally let go of the thing you're trying to hang on to, you just jump forward 2 or 3 years in one go. And you're like, wow, that happened really fast. And it's like, that's reinvention for me. That's exactly what it is. It's like you have to be prepared sometimes to go backwards and rebuild the identity, and then suddenly you jump forward in a massive way. But reinvention is more about recoding your identity, I think.
I think that's such an insightful way of looking at it. And sometimes I think you may do that on the spot or kind of eventually, but you don't actually understand that that is the process of reinvention. And later in life, I think it's you talk about, kind of grown up business, but I think that's also grown up people that it takes you some years, decades even, to understand how growth happens and how reinvention happens. So I think that's really insightful and wonderful that you teach that.
Well, thank you. For me, so here's the thing I think I've learned is that you have to realize that normally, in order to kind of like break through, we have to 9 times out of 10 have some kind of breakdown, right? Like whether that's emotionally, or we have to break down a belief, or we have to break down. There's a part of us that we have to let go of, and that doesn't happen unless you have some kind of breakdown, right? To break through. And I teach this all the time, but there's normally some kind of personal development thing where you're shifting something, right? You're breaking free of a limiting belief or a story, or 9 times out of 10 an identity somebody gave you, right? My dad's wonderful and I love him to bits, right? But my dad had a real impact on me negatively when I was 18, 19. I remember going for a sales job, and the sales job was on £18,000 a year. And my dad said, you'll never earn £18,000 a year at your age. He didn't mean it because he was trying to hold me back. He didn't mean it because he was trying to say all those kind of things. That was his perspective based on his life and his experience. And when he was 18, that number was enormous to him, right? Like, so all he was doing was just reflecting his experience of life. But if you're not careful,
trying to not let you get your hopes up too high.
Yeah, of course, right? But like, if you're not very careful at that point, that can code your brain to go, that's my identity now. I can't earn more than 18,000 or 20,000, whatever the number is. And therefore you get stuck and you don't realize when it was that you happened. I think for me, it's like, so there was a piece of reinvention that happened, which sometimes reinvention is really fast and sometimes it's really slow. And I think sometimes we all talk about the big reinventions because they're dramatic, right? So like I can talk about the fact that, I had a major heart attack at 42 and it completely changed my life. It's a dramatic thing. So it's a great story, right? Like, and it's amazing, right? Like, not really amazing. Don't try it. It's not necessarily a lot of fun, but it's a dramatic reinvention story. However, I actually think sometimes the more powerful ones are the really slow ones, the ones that take a lot of time to build up and then they pop and you're like, Where did that come from? So when I got introduced to personal development and stuff, I started reading books. I was reading a book a week. I was listening to, back in the day, I'll date myself now, but I was listening to tapes, right? Back before podcasts and all that stuff. I was listening to tapes in the car and I was doing all that stuff. And I remember having a conversation with my dad once, and my dad said, it's going to make him sound really bad, but he's not. But he just said to me, I think you're wasting your money on that stuff. I don't understand why you would do that, because he couldn't see the change was really small. It was micro movement change. So it didn't look dramatic. And I just said, look, I just believe that if I invest in me for long enough, this will pay off. That was one of the beliefs I'd picked up. And I just was like, I buy that. I buy the fact that if I can work on myself and long enough, I'll eventually evolve into a different version of me, right? It's like growing a tree, it's seeds, all of that. You have to push through the soil. That's the challenge, right? Nature teaches us all of this stuff. Nature's reinventing all the time. The seasons, it's always reinventing. And yet humans think we stay the same, and we don't. And you have different seasons of your life, and you have different times when you need to hibernate, and times when you need to grow. And it's all of that's the reinvention piece. And I had probably 5 years plus, maybe 6 years when I was just reading books every week, and from the outside nothing changed. I was still struggling. I wasn't making very much money. I didn't really have a clear direction in my life. I was bouncing around from job to job. I hadn't really figured out who I wanted to be, but also what my passion was. I hadn't figured that out, other than I just knew that personal development somehow was a big part of my life. And at some point when I was walking around a trade show when I was 31 years old, and there was an exhibition stand, and it had all the personal development books on, like Brian Tracy, Zig Ziglar, all that kind of stuff. And I was like, what the heck is that all about? Because I've read all those books. Go over, having a conversation with this amazing lady from Australia called Gail, who will forever go down as a lady that changed my life. And we had this conversation. She goes, oh, we're a business coaching franchise. And I was like, what's that? Right? Like, because nobody knew. And I had a conversation with her for about an hour. And my wife was wandering around the exhibition center, and she came back, and we went for a coffee. And I said, I think I've just spent about £40,000 on a franchise. And she went, doing what? And I said, I think I want to be a business coach. I think that's what I want to be next. I think that's what I want to do with that's what I've been like learning, all the stuff I've been reading for years. This is what I want to do in my life. And it was a moment of reinvention, but it had been happening in the background for like 10 years. I'd been preparing the ground for that seed to land. And I think sometimes we're in such a rush to get the seed, we forget to prepare the land. And I've just come back from a week in Dubai, and I have longer term plans to be outside the winter for the UK for the winter, because I don't like the cold. And it's like, but if I turn up over there and go, I'm just going to go and set it all up in one go. It's like, no, I'm going to go for a year, build relationships, build networks, build connections, and then create the soil that's fertile enough for the right opportunity when it drops. And I think sometimes when we're trying to reinvent, I've done this, where you're trying to force it too early, too quick, rather than just your job is to be prepare the ground so that when the opportunity to reinvent, to rise up, you're ready for it. You've got the identity, you've got the belief, you've got the skill set to enable you to do that. Does that make sense?
I think that makes perfect sense. I think that's so true. And I think one of the hardest things about what turns out to be reinvention usually is going through those very fallow, sometimes very painful periods where it feels like you failed, essentially, that your life is a mess, or, you're not doing what you want to be doing. And if somebody would only tell you that, okay, in a year's time, everything will be fine, or in 5 years, you'd feel I can cope with this. But the really difficult thing is going through that period and not knowing when it's going to end. And then suddenly when it does, that's a huge revelation. And sometimes it's slow, but I think that waiting period is what people need to know they have to go through, and it will end, and you will get to the place where you're meant to be.
Yeah, and it's two things really for me. It's like I live on a farm. I'm very lucky I live on a farm, so I get to see seasons happening all around me and what the farmers are doing. And it's like in the middle of the winter, they're not out harvesting, right? Like that, because that doesn't make any sense. And it's like I think we have lost the connection to that understanding about planting seeds, nurturing the seeds, giving it time, waiting for it to grow. And I think that's the same with reinvention. It's like some of that takes time. You have to plant the seed. You have to do the work on yourself. You have to get ready to become that next version of you. It's like, I often say, like, you got to figure out what you want to have, then work out what you've got to do. But actually the most important part of that equation is figure out who you're going to need to become next to make that reality. And what are you going to need to believe about yourself? What's that version of you look like? And I think if you can name it, sometimes it helps. I think if you can name that next identity that you're trying to step into, it can sometimes help. Like I talk to clients all the time, and I say the minute you change your language from seeing yourself as a managing director to seeing yourself as a CEO, that's a reinvention right there. That's what coaching does, because the minute you see yourself as a CEO, you show up differently, right? You show up differently to calls, you show up differently in meetings. If you just see yourself as a owner operator, you behave differently because your identity is different. And I think this whole reinvention starts with naming it and claiming it. That's where it starts. The minute you start to see yourself as a successful person in your head, the universe will react to that. And I think quite often, there's a great quote, there's a great Chinese proverb that says we live life forwards and understand it backwards. And I think if you can trust that the universe has your back, and that whatever you are going through at the moment is preparing you for a better place, a better future, a better opportunity. If you can learn to trust the process, because none of us are put on this planet to have a terrible experience. That's not why we're here, right? We're all here to learn something, to change, to evolve in some way. We've all come for a purpose, whatever that is for you, and it's different for everybody, right? So if if you want to learn patience, the universe doesn't give you patience. It gives you a very challenging situation that forces you to learn patience. If you want to learn creativity, then the universe will give you a whole load of difficult stuff to have to sort out and figure out, because you learn creativity that way. It's like we go, like, I'd like to have better relationships. So then the universe will give you bad relationships to figure out how to get good at relationships. It's like
So that's a very appealing way of looking at it. So, yes, all the stuff you have to go through is actually all a good learning experience. But Paul, let's before we finish, let me ask you about the big and extraordinary and you almost died reinvention. So tell me what happened there.
I did. I was clinically dead for 4.5 minutes years ago when my heart stopped beating. August bank holiday. It was coming for a long time. I was very stressed out. I was actually, now the technical term would be burnt out. I was burnt out. I wasn't looking after my health. I wasn't looking after myself. I wasn't eating well. All of the stuff that we know you shouldn't do, I was doing, right? And yet had a belief that somehow I was young enough that I could outrun it and I would be fine in the end. And it just all caught up with me one August. I'd been getting sicker for a while, and then it just escalated. I had a massive asthma attack, and the asthma attack sent me into cardiac arrest just as the paramedic arrived. And I will be eternally grateful for the NHS and eternally grateful for that paramedic who wouldn't give up. And 4.5 minutes later, I came back, and it's one of those things where you talk about reinvention because, without getting too woo-woo for a second, but I absolutely remember having a conversation about whether I wanted to stay or whether I wanted to go back. And that was an absolute complete clarity in my mind. Can remember it, can feel it today like it was yesterday. See, that's where the human element gets in the way of the brain, because it's like, well, I need to know, was it an entity? Was it this? What did they look like? It's like, that's the human bit of us that gets in the way of that, because I can't tell you that. All I know is it felt amazing, and it was it felt like a conversation, right? As in, that's the best word I can give it. But it was very clearly a choice. Like, you can choose to stay or you can choose to go. What do you want to do? And that's a reinvention question, isn't it? It's like, you can choose to go, but if you go back, there are no guarantees, right? So I just remember choosing to come back and do it differently and reinvent myself and go, I'm not going to live that version. I talk about two versions of Paul. There's the Paul 1.0 that died that day, and then there's the Paul 2.0 now, lovingly referred to as Purple Paul by most of my clients and friends, that that is not remotely the same person that person before was. That incident, that is a very different human being with a very different set of sort of beliefs about the world and a very different take on it all. And because of that journey, and for me, I was very lucky. In a very small group of people, like you're talking 2 to 3% of people under 45 who survive at-home heart attacks. It's a tiny, tiny group. I am incredibly lucky to be here. And because of that, feel very lucky every time I get the chance to have a conversation like this, or do what I do for a living, or run a retreat, or meet amazing people. I nearly didn't get to play this game for this long, so just being in the game and getting the chance to play it is a blessing every day. That doesn't mean my days don't have challenges. Of course they do, right? Being a human being is a challenging experience, right? It is supposed. There's that quote that says, "If it doesn't challenge you, it doesn't change you." Right? It's supposed to change you. You're supposed to evolve. You're supposed to get better as a person. You're not supposed to stay stagnant. And that for me was that was the biggest choice I've ever had in my life. And if you choose, I think it's choosing reinvention. That's really what that was. That was a choice of reinvention. Like, do you want to go back and do it differently? Or do you just want to stay here and call it quits and, no hard feelings kind of thing? And for me, it was like, no, I want to choose to go back and do it differently. I want to reinvent myself. I want to do it in a different way. I want to focus on different stuff and see if I do it differently, because not many people get that chance.
That's extraordinary. How would you, in just a few words, how would you characterize the difference in sort of personality, perhaps, between Paul zero point 0.1 and Purple Paul?
So I would say, yeah, I think the version, I'll put it this way, right? The version before was very me focused, right? It was all about what I could get. It was all about me, right? More of this, more of that. It was about ego. That was the ego playing the game. It was very much living from an ego space of like, hey, what can I get? All of that kind of thing. I think where I've shifted and continue to shift is into this space of, it's about contribution and abundance. It's about giving back. It's about helping other people. It's about what can I give, not what can I take. It's about how do we play a game rather than me, right? It's not me, it's we. How do I help other people in this journey? How do I help people avoid that mistakes? How do I help people grow businesses? Whatever it happens to be, but how do I serve? And it's coming from that place of, right, what do I need to do? What can I do today to be a better version of me? But also, what can I do to add value to people that I get to interact with and have conversations with and coach? And that's the difference. Whereas before, everything was coming from an ego. It's not about you, actually. It's about me. And that's the shift, right? It's less about me and more about what can I do to serve others and how can we help other people and leave some kind of a, positive residue behind me for the fact that I got this second opportunity. That's the difference. I'm looking at it through the lens of, right, when I get to 84, 85 and I look back and go, right, I had 2 goes at it. Let's compare and contrast. Did I help more people? Did I make a positive impact? Did I become a better version of me? Did did the second time around, did I do it better than I did the first time around? That's the judgment. That's the grade. And that's the difference, right?
I think, despite not particularly wanting to have a heart attack or an asthma attack, I do
Don't do it.
recognize that you were lucky. You were lucky to have that extraordinary experience, I
Huge.
think, that reinvented you. So, Paul, finally, what advice would you give to someone who is either in one of those horrible kind of betwixt and between stages where you want a reinvention but you don't know what it's going to be, or you're waiting for something to happen, or you're just feeling like a mess and a failure? What's a quick piece of advice for someone in that position now?
Okay, I'll give a couple first of all, because I think first of all, we're all a work in progress, right? Like, if you think there aren't days when I feel like a failure, then I have them now. Of course we do, right? If you're going to try stuff, if you're going to try and reinvent yourself, some of it's going to work and some of it isn't, right? And you got to be okay with the fact that you're just going to test and get feedback and data. It isn't personal. It might feel personal, but it isn't. You're just testing different things. That's one. Two is, give yourself time to just get better and improve with it, right? Don't be in such a rush to get to the end of your life. Growth takes time. Go and stand out in nature and go and stand by any tree that is over 25 feet tall. That didn't happen a week on Tuesday. That seed wasn't planted last Thursday, right? That has been years in development. Anything worth building and growing into takes time, and you've got to allow yourself to have that time. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy, but you've got to have that mindset of like, it's a process. If I stay in the process, I will get to where I'm supposed to go. Whatever that vision piece is of yours. And I would say to people, listen, hold the vision, right? Hold the vision do the work, enjoy the journey. It's like hold a vision, where you're trying to get to, do the work on you as much as anything else, right? Like, because that's the only thing you can really work on. You can't work on the rest of the world. You can only work on you, right? The world is a reflection of you. If you are not attracting what you want, it's because you are not ready to attract it, because you haven't done the work on you. All right. And then find ways to enjoy the journey, like the little bits every day. Find 3 things every day that you're grateful for. Find 3 things that mean, hey, I moved the needle forward in a positive way. I read for 20 minutes today, or I had 3 conversations. I was, I'm nice, be nice to people on the way, because we're all dealing with this stuff. And some days you're going to take big leaps forward, and some days you're just going to, crawl forward by inches. But, there's a thing I have kind of like laminated up in my bedroom. It's just like, keep moving forward, right? Just get up every day and just move forward. Some days you'll sprint, some days you'll crawl, some days it'll feel like it's tiny moves forward. But, hold the vision, get really clear on what the vision is you're trying to move towards. Do the work on you, the work to become a better version of you, right? Shift the limiting beliefs. I mean, I've seen therapists, I've seen trauma coaches to clear stuff up from my past, from the adoption stuff. I had trauma residue. I've seen sound healers to clear blocks in me that are internal stuff. So do the work on you, and then find ways to just enjoy the journey, and find, because today's the gift. That's why it's called the present. It's the reason why you get it. So find ways to just enjoy the journey, because it is the only day you get.
Paul, that is incredibly insightful and incredibly good advice. And thank you so much for this brilliant Phoenix conversation, which did not go exactly the way I expected it to. Thank you for sharing so much and
You're welcome, Lucy.
giving us so much useful insight. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much, Paul, for sharing your reinvention story, or stories, I should say, the personal, the professional, and the continuing work that you experience and teach your clients. I found your adoption journey an unexpected and inspiring topic, and was fascinated to understand how it's informed your whole life. If you've had a childhood that involved reinvention or a near-death experience, feel free to share any thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed the Phoenix conversation, please like this episode and subscribe to the podcast wherever you find it, on Spotify, Apple, or YouTube, or maybe all 3. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. I am literally the only Lucy Macara on the internet.